Nickelodeon is one of the most popular channels for content targeted towards kids on the planet. Most of the best stuff arguably came from the 90s, to the point where many of those old shows are making comebacks these days. As we await those revivals, we can look back at the classics and stare in amazement at all the small and subtle changes that the shows did over the course of their run. From animation differences to recasting, we'll bet you didn't know the story behind these changes. Before we start though, be sure to click on that subscribe button and hit that little bell to stay up to date with everything ScreenRant.
That was the most exhilarating experience of my life!
Nicky, Ricky, Dicky, and Dawn. Nicky, Ricky, Dicky, and Dawn is a live-action series Nickelodeon debuted in 2014 that follows a set of quadruplets who are constantly at odds with each other. The four claim they have nothing in common and are forever fighting amongst each other, but always pull together and tackle the challenge in each episode. The series is named after the four siblings, but that idea didn't last until the show's cancellation in 2018. During the fourth and final season of the show, Mace Coronel, who played Dicky, actually left the production of the show. He came to an agreement with Nickelodeon to leave the show, citing he wanted to tackle more mature roles than what he was doing on the kids' show. So he left, with 5 episodes left to film in the 4th season. With so little time left in the season and production, the producers had no choice but to continue filming and carry on as if everything was normal. The reason in the show for his sudden departure was that Dicky suddenly shipped himself off to Australia. Unfortunately for the rest of the cast, the show was ultimately cancelled around a month later, as one can't have a show about quadruplets without one of the siblings.
You guys, people end up in prison because they've done bad stuff.
Rugrats. Rugrats is one of the early Nickelodeon shows that put the channel on the map. It debuted in 1991, right after Doug hit the scene. The show followed the adventures of a group of babies that are made even grander thanks to their active imaginations. The show was an instant hit, and the initial run lasted until 2004. But that wasn't the end of the Rugrats. In fact, we'll be seeing a lot more of them in the future. But while the animation style changed as the seasons went on, something more bizarre changed, and you likely never even noticed it. 2 of the characters on the show are twins, Phil and Lil, and they're mainly differentiated by the bow on Lil's head and Phil's blue shorts. But one of the big things that separates them wasn't even consistent. Phil was initially drawn without earlobes, but then in the middle of the show's run in 1996 and in the Rugrats movie, the animators added earlobes to Phil's character. Even weirder is that in 1999, the earlobes were removed again. The earlier Rugrats episodes also focused more on Tommy and were a bit darker as they explored his imagination. As the group got more screen time together, the adventures became more colorful and playful. We can expect more Rugrats as a 26-episode revival season is in the works and a CGI live-action hybrid movie is due in 2020. ROCKO'S Modern Life. ROCKO'S Modern Life was one of those shows that kids from the 90s knew all too well. It featured a wallaby from Australia named Rocko, who moved to the fictional O-Town, which is likely in the United States. Much like Ren and Stimpy, the show was pretty controversial, offering a lot of suggestive and adult content which seemed to go at odds with its target audience. The show was ultimately cancelled in 1996. But that wasn't the last we've seen of Rocko, as he's coming back to TV in 2018, along with all of his friends in ROCKO'S Modern Life, Static Cling. The big change that'll be apparent is this isn't going to be a traditional TV series comprised of episodes. Instead, this will be a TV special that will see Rocko and company return to O-Town after being stranded in space for 20 years. The group must readjust to modern traditions such as smartphones, coffee shops, and the internet. Since the show is about satirizing the present, a lot of the jokes that resonated with its audience in the 90s will be obsolete. It's great to see this comeback adjust to the times and just go with the changes so naturally instead of clinging desperately to the past. Here's hoping the special leaves an impression and will kickstart more episodes of ROCKO'S Modern Life. All That was a live-action sketch comedy-inspired show for kids that aired on Nickelodeon in the 90s and lasted until 2005. The network essentially wanted to make SNL, but with a much younger demographic in mind. The show was initially set to be a one-time special, but quickly evolved into a beloved and extremely influential show that opened the horizons of many young viewers. Being a sketch comedy series targeted towards kids means the actors in the show were often replaced here and there as the years went on in order to keep the look and feel of the show young and fresh. But in 2000, the show was put on a hiatus after being on the air for 6 seasons. The producers and writers felt that the show needed to be reworked, so they spent a significant amount of time tweaking the show for a comeback. It came back in 2002, but the producers decided to go with a fresh approach and relaunched the whole entire cast from the ground up. The show would keep this cast in place until it was ultimately cancelled 4 years later. Did you used to watch all that? Did you prefer the original cast or the relaunched cast? Let us know in the comments.
Now to grant Timmy's wish!
Fairly Odd Parents. Fairly Odd Parents is one of those shows that seemed to go on forever. It made its debut on Nickelodeon in 2003 and only came to a conclusion in 2017, without any reboots or revivals after extended periods of time. The show went on a 1-year hiatus in 2006, but promptly returned in 2007. The series follows Timmy Turner and his adventures with his 2 magical fairy godparents, who show up one day to make his miserable home life that much more bearable by granting him anything he wishes. For years, the Fairly Odd Parents looked pretty much the same as the seasons went on. This is because for most of the show's run, the animation was done by the same studio, Yesun Entertainment, until they were abruptly changed to Elliott Animation in the 10th season, who used Adobe Flash animation instead of the traditional animation found in the previous 9 seasons. The new animation is a lot more fluid and brighter than its older animation style. Except for the insertion of the Odd Parents' baby Poof into the title sequence, the intro was virtually identical to the original until it too got a reboot later on. But despite the modern animation, most fans prefer the older animation style.
1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, fatty. Your blubber disgusts me.
Doug. Doug got his start as a sketch character drawn by Jim Jenkins back in the 80s. He would draw little character moments inspired by his own life and tried pitching it as a children's book before Nickelodeon bought the show, which in turn ended up as one of their first original animated shows. The show was a massive hit too, and helped make the channel what it is today. But Disney knew Doug was a gold mine and ended up acquiring the rights to the show in 1996. Even to this day, many fans will defend that the original Nickelodeon version is the definitive version and ultimately the one that was made better. Disney ended up changing quite a bit of Doug, even if you don't really notice it too much. There was the theme song, and on that note, they downplayed the importance of music to the characters in the show. The series had a band named The Beats, which is a little nod towards the Beatles. Yeah, those guys. And they were a major influence on Doug in the early years. While the Beats were in the Disney version, albeit in a smaller capacity, they also played a much smaller role on Doug as a person. The band ended up just feeling like a background character instead of an important part of the show's own lore and history.
Mom, Dad, you're really back!
Hey, Arnold!
Hey Arnold! It seems to be a recent thing for Nickelodeon shows to be rebooting their older, more popular shows, and Hey Arnold is no exception to this rule. It made its debut in 1996 and followed the titular Arnold, a regular 4th grader, and his experiences at a boarding house in the big city. The show had a good run too, and aired episodes up until 2004 with a film that came out in 2002. It seemed that the series finale in 2004 was the end of Hey Arnold for quite a while, but the character came back in 2017 for a one-time TV movie titled Hey Arnold: The Jungle Movie. But like many of the old school 90s animated shows on Nickelodeon, this new version brought in some new changes to the animation that seem almost jarring when compared side by side. Arnold himself still has the wild hair and the tiny hat, but his eyes in particular look a lot more expressive. In the original series, Arnold's eyes seemed vacant and empty, as if he was constantly lost in a daydream. When compared to the original animations from the 80s and his comic book run in the 90s, Arnold and his friends have certainly come a long way over the decades.
You're such good pups.
Paw Patrol. Depending on how old you are, you may have never heard of Paw Patrol, but if you're a kid or a parent, you likely know Paw Patrol a little too well. It's one of the most popular children's shows on the planet right now, and has an army of merchandising out there that makes it hard not to know what Paw Patrol is, and is likely the bane of every parent's existence right now, as that merch ain't cheap. The series follows a boy named Ryder, who works with a group of rescue dogs in Canada. Each episode focuses on Ryder's adventures with one or a few of the dogs, who as a unit are known as Paw Patrol. Despite being so crazy popular, things aren't so easy going behind the scenes. In fact, just about every actor on the show, except Cal and Holly, who voices Sky, has been replaced at one point or another. The new voice actors largely don't sound too much like the original voice cast either, to the point where big-name celebrity dads like Ashton Kutcher notice when the characters start sounding different, just like that one time when he tweeted out for noticing that Ryder's voice actor had changed. In fact, Ryder had been voiced by 3 actors at that point.
Hey, a couple of smoking salmon just swam by.
iCarly. iCarly is a sitcom targeted towards teens that debuted in 2007 and lasted until 2012. It followed Carly, a young girl who creates her own web series titled iCarly. The show ends up being a smash hit, launching her and her friends to stardom, which they must now contend with while simultaneously dealing with normal teenage problems. Early on in the show's run, the 3rd episode in fact, fans were introduced to Gibby, who was played by Noah Monk. Gibby would become something of a fan favorite character, but you'd be forgiven in thinking he was part of the main cast from the get-go due to his likability and fan base. For the first 3 seasons, Gibby was actually a recurring guest role. It wasn't until season 4 hit that the character would become part of the principal cast. Nickelodeon decided that the popularity of the character was too much to be simply relegated to a supporting role, so after 3 seasons, they eventually decided that Gibby's place was on the main roster, where he remained until the show was cancelled in season 7.
Gotta be in top physical condition for today, Gary.
Spongebob Squarepants. Spongebob Squarepants is known for being something of a classic among those who grew up in the 90s. The wacky humor, colorful animation, and expressive characters allowed it to endure for 11 seasons and a couple of motion pictures. The earlier seasons varied quite differently though from some of the more recent offerings. SpongeBob began its run in 1999 and continues to air to this day. But like The Simpsons and other hit animated shows that have lasted this long, the show is naturally bound to evolve over the years. Let's take a look at the earlier seasons, which feature a much more muted color palette in comparison to what we might find in seasons 9, 10, and 11. This can be attributed to advancements in technology as the years went on. But while the animation was going forward, it seems the quality of the jokes were not. While the earlier seasons were very clever and unique with how it handled things like gags and comedic timing, the newer seasons relied heavily on meta and self-referential jokes, which can be at odds with how the show was originally written. But SpongeBob is still insanely popular, with another motion picture due on the big screen in 2020. So despite changing its style over time, clearly SpongeBob isn't going anywhere. Well, that's it for now, everyone. Which show do you think had the biggest change? Which do you think affected the show the most? What was your favorite Nickelodeon show of all time? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in your playlist every day. Thanks for watching.